Chris Carter trashes Chad Johnson's career. After hearing Chad Johnson and Travis Hunter have a fun back and forth, going at it and talking. You know how Chad do, talking about he'll route Travis Hunter up, and Hunter talking about what do you do to him. You know, they was going back and forth. So Chris Carter decides to chime in after hearing these two go back and forth. Let's check it out.
Go back to points in Chad's career where, and definitely the point he was in New England, you had to go out there and tell him what to do because he couldn't get open to save his life. So I remember times he had an NFL uniform open that he couldn't get open against average guys.
Guys that were worse than that weren't near as good as Hunter.
There's nothing that pissed me off more than old guys who used to be able to do something, and when they recall what they did, they swear up and down that it was better than how they did it. Look up Chad's stats. How many catches he got? How many touchdowns he got? Look it up. Like,
is there any chance that Hunter can't stop him?
There's a better chance of Chad getting in the Hall of Fame than Hunter stopping him.
And what are the odds that Chad gets in the Hall of Fame?
None.
That's bad, ain't it? How did that sound to you, man? That
sound like
I don't want to be biased, and I hope I'm not biased. So I want to hear from you. What does that sound like? What does that sound like to the chat? Y'all talk to me, cause
to me, that's like the old school hate. Like, you young boys don't know what you're doing. Like, I did this, like that. That's like that came off to me like that. Like, man, you gotta put some respect on his name. My man, yo, that's the old school hate. I feel like that's the old school hate. Like,
it's the old school hate. The old school, exactly what Chris Carter was talking about. Chris Carter is really starting to feel himself, you know what I mean, when he gets in front of these mics, right? And we heard him previously go off on some kids and things like that, and we're not going to talk about, right? But the new podcast era brings out the true colors in a lot of people, i.e. Chris Carter. Chris Carter must think he's a top 5 all-time wide receiver. That's who he believe he is. If he's talking like this, and especially coming at Chad Ochocinco, you know what I mean? Listen, y'all listen and y'all hear me clear. Listen, first, yes, I think Chris Carter, he was great during his time. He was a hell of a route runner. He ran some hell of a routes, and he had some of the best hands in football. That's what he was known for, route running and having really good hands, right? But he is really beside himself coming for Chad Johnson. He is really beside himself coming for Chad Johnson. And he was nothing more than a possession receiver. That's all Chris Carter was, a possession receiver. A receiver that catches the ball and is immediately tackled. That's what a possession receiver is. They have no yak. Chris Carter is overrated, to be honest. He is really talking about himself. Chris Carter is one of the most overrated cornerbacks to ever come in the NFL or into the Hall of Fame. As a cornerback, understand what I'm saying. As a cornerback, what do I have to worry about covering a guy like Chris Carter? He's going to run a nice, crispy route and get tackled immediately. Okay. I'm not worried about him running past me. No one's worried about him running past them. So what fear does he put in any in cornerback or defense? What Chris Carter did in his career wasn't anything special. Maybe above average, but it wasn't anything special. His highest yards per reception in his career was 13 yards. 13 yards per reception was his highest average per reception. And then Randy Moss came. Randy Moss came Chris Carter's rookie season and tied Chris Carter's career highs in receiving yards. Receiving yards and touchdowns. Moss had 1,313 yards, I remember. I just looked it up. And he had 1,313 yards receiving with 17 touchdowns. Chris Carter had 1,371 yards with 17 touchdowns. This completely tells the story that Chris Carter was a possession receiver. Randy Moss came to that team and outshined Chris Carter starting from his rookie season. What is Chris Carter talking about? How does Chris Carter feel he has the right to come for Chad Johnson? Talk to me, Dries.
Hey, listen, man, we got some people in the chat talking about Chris Carter's a bona fide Hall of Famer. They don't know that Chad
Yes.
Johnson.
Let me talk to Heck, man. Is that Heck
Man,
Santee?
let's talk on that.
Yes, Heck, man. Yes, he's a bona fide Hall of Famer. Did you listen to the live stream or did you come on late? These accolades and everything is starting to get watered down from the Hall of Fame, All Pro, Pro Bowl. Everything is watered down. It's not reality. It's not the truth. It's not who was the best. You understand? And I'm gonna break it down to you, Heck. Stay in here. Stay into this thing, because Chris Carter, he said, let's look up the stats. He said, look up Chad Johnson's stats. Let's talk about their stats. Chris Carter doesn't realize, before we get into these stats, Chris Carter doesn't realize he is exactly who he thinks these older guys is. He thinks he's better than he actually was. If Chris Carter is a Hall of Famer, I don't see any reason why Chad shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. I think we're caught up in looking at the Hall of Fame and not looking during the backstory and doing your research and seeing other people in that position. For instance, Carter has 130 touchdowns over his career receiving. Chad only has 67, but Chris Carter played 5 more seasons than Ocho Cinco. Of course, Chad had a better yards per catch average than Chris Carter, because I said Chris Carter, he only had 13 yards per catch, average 13 yards per catch. The more times a quarterback has to complete or keep completing the football to a possession receiver, the more opportunities the quarterback has to make a mistake. When other receivers only need the ball in their hands a few times before they make a big play. A possession receiver, I got to keep feeding you that ball to get to the touchdown. And then Chad has more seasons with more passing, with more receiving yards than Chris Carter. With more, let's take the top 3 seasons with receiving yards. Chad is going to have more receiving yards than Chris Carter. You know what I mean? So does Chris Carter even know what he's talking about when he get up here and doing all that hooting and hollering and screaming and things like that? Does he even realize his yards doesn't compare? Or maybe that's why he said, let's look up the receptions and touchdowns, because he knows he has more receptions, less yak, less receiving yards, but more touchdowns, you know? Talk to me, man.
Let's put out the fact that who played the quarterback. That plays a big factor on your receiving yards, on your reception, all that stuff. I mean,
Okay.
Chad Johnson, he had a quarter, like, he didn't have a good as quarterback as Chris Carter did his whole career. So let's put that in factor as well too.
Well, I think that's debatable. I think that was debatable. Chris Carter had, who did he have before Dante Culpepper? I can't forget his name. But Chad Johnson had Carson Palmer. Carson Palmer is pretty legit, you know. He's pretty solid. He's pretty solid. But look, I can't think of the name who Chris Carter had. But but all I hear from this, all I got from Chris Carter going in on Chad Johnson is hate. It sounded like he was hating and he had some strife built up in his heart. All this started from Chad Johnson and Travis Hunter going back and forth. Chris Carter decided to go at Chad Johnson because Chad is being himself, having fun with Travis Hunter, and Chad was jokingly talking about Madden ratings and him giving Travis Hunter a 76 and talking about he can't cover him and this and that. And Chad and Chris Carter got in his feelings and went in on Chad Johnson, not even understanding or knowing the facts about Chad Johnson's career.
Heck also said, I don't know how old Heck is. I don't know. He probably like 12 or something. Chad Johnson is all mouth, nothing else. Like,
yeah,
Chad Johnson is all mouth, man. You ain't been paying attention to his game, man. Chad Johnson had the footwork, he had the moves, he had the celebrations. He kind of like boost NFL a little bit, because a lot of times when NFL was down, they started calling the no fun league because Chad Johnson made that shit fun. We all look forward to see him score we ain't go even like forget the Chad Johnson. He changed his name to Ocho Cinco. Like he changed his name to Ocho Cinco. He put in a whole performance, showing a touchdown, showing the celebrations. That's a whole nother level when NFL was falling off down on ratings. He bring that shit back up. Like we look forward to see like what he gonna do next. I mean, he talked trash. He said, I don't know, he ever send you something? Like, was that your time? Send you something to your mailbox? Now you know he better
Yeah, man. Hey, I think, and then you know, us fans, you know, I'm a fan now that I'm not playing, but we get a little biased and caught up in our era and the people that we used to watching, and we're in love with them, and so caught up in what they did in their time, not understanding that 10 years later, or 20 years later, these other receivers and players are coming out and they're doing much more impressive things than the guys before them. So, you know, it's a give and take there, but don't you sit up here and think or believe that Chad Ochocinco's career as a receiver wasn't just as good as Chris Carter. I don't understand how Chris Carter came up with this.
If you don't think Ocho Cinco Hall of Famer, man, you don't know football.
Yeah.
If you don't think Asante Samuel Hall of Famer, you don't know football.
And then how can you justify that your career is so great and so good? Then your team drafts a rookie in Randy Moss, and Randy Moss comes in and immediately and have career highs just as you in his rookie season. I mean, he's about 50 yards off in receiving yards, but he ties you in touchdowns. And then after his rookie season, he just takes over as the #1 receiver and beats all his receiving yards. You understand?
Let's be real. Let's be real about this, right? When you think Vikings receiver, what you think? Randy Moss, Justin Jefferson, like Chris Carter's an afterthought. When you think about Bengals receivers, who you think about? Ocho Cinco, and you think about
Chase.
Like you
right.
like,
even TJ
Chris Carter talking about he this guy, but he's an afterthought when you talk about Vikings receivers.
Right. And then I mean I that can be one of those things that kind of can go along with the hype train. You know, who do you think about when these teams and things like that? But to like what you're saying, Dries, what game did you have such an impact on, or how did you lead your team to the playoffs or the Super Bowl? What did you do so significant that made, you know, that sticks out to everybody and say you were so raw on these teams, you know, and you did such a good job in these games? I think it's a hype train, in my honest opinion. I think it has to do a lot with his story, the backstory of Chris Carter. He has a wonderful story. He overcame a lot. And I think that's, at the end of the day, that's what it's about. Chad Ochocinco, you can't take this stuff, man. You have to stick up for yourself. You have to come out swinging, man. You can't sit up here and allow another receiver who doesn't, I mean, the stats are comparable. But I think you need to come out and defend yourself and put Chris Carter in his place, because the way he was coming at your career is just mind-boggling, in my opinion.